All right, so today we're going to be talking about something called cellular respiration. So this is very similar to photosynthesis. The equation is almost the exact same. And so this is a process that we do to utilize the energy that's made during photosynthesis. So let's go ahead and get started. Our definition for cellular respiration is the process, wow, I cannot spell, okay, the process of breaking down glucose to release energy. And in this case, the energy is in the form of ATP for the cell to do work. So your cells are doing cellular respiration right now. We need cellular respiration to live. This is the only way that we're going to be able to utilize those molecules that we eat in order to gain energy. And so we're going to be breaking down glucose or any other type of sugar really that we get from our food. So who does cellular respiration? Well, there's a reason why I put this little picture of a mitochondria right here. And that's because everything that has mitochondria for sure does cellular respiration. But we have to remember that this is the process of making energy. And so there are organisms that don't have mitochondria that also will do cellular respiration. So everything that is living, okay, so everything living does cellular respiration. Okay, so we know that things like animals, plants, fungi, and protists use mitochondria. And mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. And the reason we call it that is because that's where cellular respiration occurs. And then we have bacteria. Bacteria don't have mitochondria. And so cellular respiration is done in the cytoplasm. Okay, so that's what's special with bacteria. Cellular respiration is done in their cytoplasm. So next, we need to go over our formula here. So hopefully this formula looks familiar. I told you guys you needed to remember the photosynthesis formula. So for photosynthesis, plants take in carbon dioxide and water, and they use sunlight to create glucose and oxygen. And so if I look at this, this is the exact same, but backwards. And we don't need sunlight for anything to occur, so sunlight's not part of the picture. But we're going to be taking glucose and oxygen, and these are going to be the reactants for cellular respiration. And then that means we get these three things as our products. So we're going to take in glucose and oxygen, and then our body goes through cellular respiration using the mitochondria. We'll breathe out carbon dioxide, get rid of water through sweat and urine, and then we produce energy in this process in the form of ATP. So the exact same as photosynthesis, just backwards. So for photosynthesis, I told you guys cows go. So cows go on the grass. But for cellular respiration, it's the opposite. We're saying go cows, like go cows go. So maybe we are cheering them on and they're running in a race or something like that. So they're going to need that energy. So we do have two types of cellular respiration. So our first one is called anaerobic. Okay, so we have anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic very simply means without oxygen. Okay, so without oxygen. So that means that things like yeast and bacteria that's who's going to form or perform anaerobic respiration. Also, because it's yeast and bacteria, we said they don't have a mitochondria. So anaerobic respiration is done in the cytoplasm. Okay, so that one's done in the cytoplasm. So on the opposite of that, we also have aerobic respiration. So those of you that have parents that maybe grew up in the 80s, okay, or maybe even from the 90s, they may have heard of this. So back in the day, it was really big to do aerobic videos for workouts. And so they would pop in a video cassette tape, which many of y'all may not know what that is. And they would follow along to somebody doing like a step aerobics or maybe like Taibo, stuff like that. So those were all different types of aerobic exercise. It makes you breathe really hard. And so aerobic exercises or aerobic respiration is with oxygen. Okay, so the only way that this can happen is if you have mitochondria. And between these two, between anaerobic and aerobic, aerobic is the best one. Okay, this one makes a lot of ATP. Okay, you get a lot of energy doing aerobic respiration. That one is the best. So next, I need to go over the steps of cellular respiration. I couldn't fit this all on one page, so you could see that's why I have big old blank spaces here. So on our second page, let's go ahead and go over those steps really quick. Okay, so I have different stages of cellular respiration. Okay, so you can see right here, I have glycolysis right at the top. And that's because glycolysis happens for aerobic and anaerobic respiration. So glycolysis is the physical act of breaking down glucose. Glyco sounds like glucose and lysis means to break. So for like glycolysis, I'm breaking down glucose into two things called pyruvic acids. I'm just going to put that right there, into two pyruvic acids. Okay, so breaking down glucose into two pyruvic acids. Because this is the first step for aerobic and anaerobic, everything does this. And so this is going to occur in the cytoplasm. Glucose is too big to enter in the mitochondria, so we need to go through glycolysis first. So I'm going to put a star here. Occurs in cytoplasm. Happens for everything. Okay, so all living organisms do glycolysis. Now, glycolysis is not very efficient. I'm only going to make 2 ATP from this. Okay, so if we think about 2 ATP, maybe like a quarter of a breath. So 2 ATP doesn't give you much energy. So we need more energy than this. So I told y'all that we have 2 types. We have aerobic and anaerobic. So it depends on if you have oxygen or if you don't have oxygen, which direction you're going to go. So without oxygen, we're going to go into anaerobic respiration and we're going to stay in the cytoplasm. Okay, so I'm just going to write that right here. Anaerobic, stay in cytoplasm. So if we have to stay in the cytoplasm, we're going to go through a process called fermentation. So for fermentation, I have 2 types. I have one called alcoholic. Use a different pen for that. Okay, so I have alcoholic. And alcoholic is used by bacteria and yeast. And so this is actually how, what's it called? For bread, when we're baking bread, this is how we get the little bubbles inside of our bread after it's baked. It's because we have yeast that we put into our dough and the yeast start going through anaerobic respiration and they start producing little carbon dioxide bubbles. And so those carbon dioxide bubbles will stay whenever we bake the bread and now we have holes in our bread. The reason why it's also called alcoholic, I mean, we use this to make things like beer and wine. And so, it has that distinct smell because the bacteria and the yeast are going through alcoholic fermentation. So we also have one called lactic acid fermentation. So lactic acid fermentation actually occurs in our muscles. Okay, so it's kind of like our last ditch resort if we've used all of our energy up and we don't have any ATP left. And so our muscles will go through lactic acid fermentation. And this is actually what causes muscle soreness. So after you've had a really hard workout and you're still sore like 3 days later, it's because you have lactic acid in your muscles. And if you have a muscle knot, like after you worked out and you have to try to massage it, it's because you have lactic acid there that you need to massage away. You need to break it up so it goes away. So fermentation is not very effective either. You only make 2 ATP at a time. Okay, so now total, if we're doing anaerobic respiration, we get 4 ATP from one glucose molecule. We have 2 from glycolysis and 2 from fermentation. So without oxygen, not very efficient. Anaerobic respiration is only going to give you 4 ATP. So let's go ahead and go over with oxygen, what that is. So because it's with oxygen, we know this is aerobic respiration. And so we're in the mitochondria now. Okay, our first step was glycolysis. So now we have these 2 pyruvic acids, and now they're going to go into the mitochondria. Okay, so because remember, glucose is too big to go in the mitochondria, we needed to break it up. So those 2 pyruvic acids are going to enter into the mitochondria. And so now we have the Krebs cycle. So during the Krebs cycle, essentially it's just going to go around and around, and we're going to harvest electrons from our pyruvic acid. It's not very efficient. Okay, we're going to make 2 ATP. All right. But the big kicker is right here, my electron transport chain. We now have all of these electrons from the pyruvic acid, and so those electrons are going to move to the electron transport chain. We need oxygen. Oops, uses oxygen. And because of the oxygen and all those electrons, we're going to make about 32 ATP. So you can see electron transport chain is the best. So doing aerobic respiration is absolutely the best one to do if you want the most ATP. So I have 32 plus 2 plus 2. Okay, that's going to give me, let's see here, 36 ATP about. So that's quite a bit more than over here where I get 4. Okay, so I get more ATP from my aerobic respiration. So lastly, let's go ahead and fill out this diagram. Okay, so I have a mitochondria here. Kind of looks like my chloroplast, but not quite. It's just a little bit different. And so I'm going to go ahead and start over here on the left. So on the left-hand side, this is my cytoplasm. So remember, our first step was glycolysis. So I'm going to put glycolysis right here. And that's the process of taking glucose and breaking it down. Okay, so glucose is going to be used for glycolysis. And from here, remember, I only get 2 ATP. Okay, these little explosions down here are my ATP. So now, because of glycolysis, my glucose was broken in half. If I don't have oxygen, I'm going to stay out here. If I do have oxygen, my pyruvates or my pyruvic acid from my glucose is going to go inside. So in here, I have my Krebs cycle. Okay, that pyruvic acid is going to go round and round and round and round. I'm going to get 2 ATP. I'm going to get a bunch of electrons. And during my Krebs cycle, this is when I breathe out carbon dioxide. Okay, breathing in oxygen, breathing out carbon dioxide. So I'm going to get rid of carbon dioxide. And then from my last step, this is where I'm breathing in my oxygen. This is where I need that. So oxygen is going to come in, and then here's my electron transport chain. Sometimes people call it the ETC. So oxygen came in, and I have all these electrons left over from the Krebs cycle. And so with this, I'm going to be able to make a lot of ATP. So I'm going to make about 32 ATP. And then my byproduct right here is going to be water. So I can see, okay, with this particular cycle, I have glucose and oxygen. Okay, so here's my glucose, here's my oxygen. Okay, those are my two things that are coming in. And then coming out, here's my carbon dioxide, and here's my water. And then, of course, I have all these ATP. So go ahead, finish copying these down. Let me know if you have any questions.